I got a wool blue shirt, it suits me just fine. I like the way it feels, so I wear it all the time. I got a old guitar, won't ever stay in tune. I like the way it sounds in a dark and empty room. I got an old pair of boots, and they fit just right. Well, I can work all day and I can dance all night. I got an old used car, it runs just like a top. I get the feeling that they never gonna stop. Stuff that works, stuff that holds up, the kind of stuff you don't hang on the wall. Stuff that's real, stuff you feel, the kind of stuff you reach for when you fall. Got a pretty good friend who seen me at my worst. You can't tell if that's a blessing or a curse. But he always shows up when the ships are down. And that's the kind of stuff I like to be around. Stuff that works, stuff that holds up, the kind of stuff you don't hang on the wall. Stuff that's real, stuff you feel, the kind of stuff you reach for when you fall. You got a woman I love, she's crazy, paints like God. She's got a playground sense of justice, she won't take odds. I got a tattoo with her name right through my soul. I think everything she touches turns to gold. Stuff that works, stuff that holds up, the kind of stuff you don't hang on the wall. Stuff that's real, stuff you feel, the kind of stuff you reach for when you fall.
Thank you, Doug. We're pleased to have Doug with us this morning. Thanks for providing the music, and welcome. Good Sunday morning to you. Welcome to Presbyterian Church of the Covenant here in Greensboro. For those online, athinkingchurch.org, that should be on your screen somewhere. You can find out a lot more about us there. We hope you will. And if you're able to make a small donation, help us stay online. Those that are here, as always, our basket is right over there next to the door. We won't be passing that around. We are glad to have everybody here. It's a lovely Sunday morning, just a little humid, but not bad at all. I'm going to start with two readings this morning. The first, we're going to continue on this series of stories that we've heard that might have different meanings than what we've always been told they mean. This one you are going to be familiar with. Maybe not the first part I read, but you'll definitely be familiar, probably be familiar with both, but you'll definitely be familiar with the second part. It comes from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 12, verses 38 through 44. And as always, I'll be reading from the New Revised Standard Version, the updated edition of that. Hear now these words. And the he here is Jesus. As he taught, he said, beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and have the best seats in the synagogue. I noticed that no one's sitting in the front seats. Might be related on that. Best seats in the synagogues and places of honors at banquets. They devour widows' houses, and for the sake of appearance, they say long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation. It continues. He sat down opposite of the treasury and watched the crowd putting money into the treasury. This is the synagogue treasury. Many rich people put in large sums, but a poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which were worth a penny. Then he called his disciples and said to them, truly, I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all of those who are contributing to the treasury. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she's contributed out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all she had to live on. May we add blessing and understanding the reading of those words. I do have a second reading I want to share with you. It comes from Robert P. George, and he is an American legal scholar, a political philosopher, and he has a very long title. The McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence and Director of the James Madison Program in the American Ideals and Institutions at Princeton University. This comes from an article he wrote entitled The Natural Law Foundation of International Human Rights and Religious Freedom. It was actually published on the Heritage Foundation. He had this to say. You don't need to be really pretty or really smart or really strong or any of those things. You merely need to be a human being. The weakest, the most vulnerable, the outcast, the suffering person, the homeless woman, the mentally ill, or the drug-addicted man living under a bridge, the individual at the dawn of life, even in the womb, or approaching the end of life, all have basic human rights. None is superior or inferior to any other in basic dignity on account of race, sex, ethnicity, age, size, location, mental capacity, physical ability, stage of development, or condition of dependency. All have and have equally human rights. Now, if there is such a thing as rights we have simply in virtue of humanity, it must be because there's something very special about our humanity. It's that very special thing, that very specialness that we refer to in using the fairly modern term human dignity. It refers to the intrinsic worth or value, or to use a religious term, the sacredness of human beings. In other words, human beings are not just means to others' ends or to other people's ends. They are not cogs in the wheel of a larger collectivity, for example, like the state or the fatherland or the future communist utopia or what have you. On the contrary, human beings are ends to which other things, including other institutions, legal systems, political system, education systems, are means. Human beings do not exist to serve these institutions. Rather, they exist to serve human beings. So, ask for another song.
That first song, by the way, was a song by the great Guy Clark. This is a new one of mine. It's called Survivors. Looked into the mirror didn't like what he saw. No beginning, no ending, no why, no because. He could not go on, so he came up with a plan, doing what made him happy, not listening to the man. They call it most survivors, just try to keep moving on. Not a saint, not a sinner, sometimes right, sometimes wrong. She dressed and fed her children for nigh on 11 years. And when he left her for another, she had no time for tears. Got it together, lawyered up, and took his ass to court. Took him to the cleaners and said, have a nice life, sport. She's another survivor that just kept moving on. Not a saint, not a sinner, sometimes right, sometimes wrong. We rejoiced and we suffered. We laughed and we cried. We feel joy and heartache. We live until we die. Yet through all our travels, below and above, we find time for connection. We find time for love. We are all survivors. We gotta keep moving on. Sometimes saints, sometimes sinners, sometimes right, sometimes wrong. Sometimes right, sometimes wrong.
Thank you. That was fantastic. My message this morning is entitled, Everybody Else Was Watching the Offering. As we continue in this series on Bible stories you've heard one way most of your life, but may actually mean something else, I have to admit that even for me, every now and then I come across a Bible story that I've believed for years, maybe even preached for years, and then I discover I may have been looking at it a little bit wrong. This is one of those stories. I can't tell you how many stewardship sermons I've heard built around the widow's mite. Honestly, I might have done one or two of them myself. The outline for it practically writes itself, right? Rich people put large sums into the offering. A poor widow drops in 2 tiny coins, and Jesus says she gave more than everyone else because she gave out of her poverty rather than out of her abundance. Then you just move on to the application of it. Be like the widow, give sacrificially, trust in God, in the sermon, right? It's such a familiar interpretation that most people don't even stop to question the interpretation. But this week, I found myself asking a question that I'd never really asked of this story before. Not the question of what did the widow give, but why do we assume when Jesus talks about a smile? I mean, think about it. If an elderly woman walked into Church of the Covenant next Sunday, waited until nobody was looking, and then quietly slipped her last $2 into the offering basket over there, what would we do? Would we clap? Would we say, now that's faith? I gotta say, I sure hope not. I really don't think we would. I hope one of us would quietly just walk over to her and say, you don't need to do that. Let us treat you to lunch instead. And while we're at it, let's talk about if you need anything else. Because that's what love would do. That's what love would do. So why do we assume that Jesus does something different in this story? I mean, whenever the way we've interpreted a Bible story leads me to act differently than what I think Jesus would act. Well, when that happens, I get a little curious. And I'll tell you a little secret. Curiosity kind of become one of my new favorite spiritual practices. So let's get curious together about this. Now, here's something I had really kind of not noticed very well before. This story doesn't begin with the widow. It begins, as we heard, with a few verses earlier where Jesus is talking about religious leaders. And listen to what he says. Because of the scribes, who like to walk around in long robes, who like the places of honor, who say long prayers for appearance sake. Then he says something that should stop us in our tracks. He says, they devour widows' houses. They devour widows' houses. That's not even subtle. Jesus doesn't say that, no, they're a little misguided. He doesn't say that they're trying their best. He says they devour widows' houses. So religion at its worst had become something that consumed the people that it was supposed to care for. Now, here's where Mark does something brilliant. I'm not doing that annoying third person talking about yourself kind of thing. This is about the author of Mark, who, for convenience sake, we're going to call Mark. So, think about this brilliant thing that Mark does. Without changing the scene, without changing the location, without changing the conversation, he introduces the very next character. After saying that, the character is a widow. Obviously, that's not accidental. Mark is too good of a storyteller for that. But we don't tend to hear anyone using that in understanding the story he tells. Mark wants us to hear Jesus condemn a religious system that devours widows. And then he immediately asks us to watch a widow standing right in front of us. He's inviting us to connect those dots. The widow walks over to the treasury. She reaches into whatever little pouch she is carrying, and she drops in 2 tiny coins. And Mark even tells us how much they're worth, and well, it's almost nothing that they're worth. Then he adds a detail that's easy to miss. Jesus says, she has put in everything she had, all she had to live a life. The Greek on this, the Greek is actually more striking. The Greek simply says she put in her whole life. She didn't simply give all of her money. She gave her whole life. Okay, can I just say something? That doesn't sound like good news to me. The gospel, particularly Jesus, is supposed to be good news, isn't it? She gave her whole life. That's not good news. That's heartbreaking. And whenever something in the gospel sounds heartbreaking, but generations of Christians have turned it into an inspirational story, I guess I start paying closer attention to it. Over the last several decades, a number of, turns out, New Testament scholars have suggested that we have been reading this passage almost backwards. Scholars like Addison Wright have argued that Jesus isn't holding the widow up as an example. He says he's holding the temple up as an indictment. Think about the order of the story. Jesus condemns leaders who devour widows. Then he points to a widow who has almost nothing left. Maybe Mark isn't changing the subject in between those 2 readings like it tends to get preached. Maybe he's illustrating it. Maybe Jesus isn't saying, look how wonderful this widow is. Maybe he's saying, look what this system has done to her. Y'all, those are two very different sermons there. One asks us to admire the widow. The other asks us to question the institution. And honestly, I think the second one, that second question sounds a whole lot more like Jesus, doesn't it? All right. It is that time again. I'm going to ask you to turn to something. My introverts, I feel you. You know what to do. Turn to someone near you. Spend a few minutes talking about this. Can you think of a time when a good institution, say a church, a school, a business, even a family, slowly began asking more from the people than it was giving back to? So talk about what happened. How did you know something had shifted? Take a few minutes to think about it and share with somebody. And it might be that just one person has that story, but think about it for a minute and share. And I'll call you back in a couple minutes. Let's wrap this conversation up. It comes back here. I actually love that it's so hard to get y'all to stop talking to each other. It's fantastic. So think about what various folks probably just talked about. I bet there were stories about churches and businesses and schools and families, maybe even governments. I don't know. Different places, different circumstances, but they all have something in common. They started with good intentions. Somebody saw a need, somebody wanted to help, somebody believed people mattered, and then little by little, something shifted. The institution became the thing that had to be protected. The mission became protecting the organization instead of serving people in the organization, the people that the organization was created to serve. You know, I don't think that kind of thing tends to happen overnight. I don't think anybody wakes up one morning and says, hey, you know what? Let's stop caring about people. It happens one small decision at a time, one compromise at a time, one budget meeting at a time, one policy at a time, until one day, everybody is protecting the institution, and hardly anybody is noticing the widow. That's why I've become so interested in what I call behavioral theology. As we've talked about, behavioral theology starts with a simple observation. If I really want to know what somebody believes, I don't start by asking them what they believe. I watch them. Not because words don't matter, words do matter. But because behavior tells us which words have actually taken root. And I think the same is true of churches and denominations and nonprofits and governments, even institutions. Every institution has a behavioral theology. Not just the theology written on its constitution or on its webpage. The theology revealed by its behavior. If you'd asked those religious leaders what they believed in this story, I suspect they would have given beautiful answers. We believe in justice. We believe in mercy. We believe in caring for widows. They probably could have quoted chapter and verse about it, but if you'd ignored everything they said and simply watched what happened to that widow, you would have learned their actual theology. Because theology isn't only something we confess, it's something we practice. Behavior is where belief becomes visible. Behavior is where belief becomes visible. And here's what I can't get out of my mind. Everybody else was watching the offering. Jesus was watching the widow. Everybody else saw 2 little coins. Jesus saw an entire life. Everybody else measured the gift. Jesus measured the cost. Everybody else noticed the treasury. Jesus noticed the person. But I've wondered how often we do the opposite. How often do we become fascinated by the offering and forget about the widow? Maybe not literally. I don't think literally at all, really. Maybe it's the volunteer who's been carrying the church for years and is quietly exhausted. Maybe it's the caregiver who never asks for help because everyone assumes they're doing just fine. Maybe it's the single parent who keeps showing up with a smile while wondering how the bills are going to get paid. Maybe it's the teenager who is sitting by themselves wondering if anyone is going to notice them. Maybe it's the person who keeps giving emotionally, financially, spiritually until there's almost nothing left. And everyone thanks them for the dedication instead of asking whether they should have had to carry so much in the first place. Something tells me that Jesus notices those people. Because Jesus always seems to notice the people that everyone else is just walking past. The disciples saw children. Jesus saw the kingdom. The crowd saw a tax collector. Jesus saw Zacchaeus. The religious leaders, they saw a sinner. Jesus saw the daughter of Abraham. The empire saw another criminal nailed to a cross, and Jesus saw someone that was worth forgiveness. And here in this story, the temple saw another offering. Jesus saw the widow. Okay. One more time, turn to somebody. And here's the question. What are some behaviors that tell you a church is watching the widow instead of just watching the offering? In other words, what tells you that people matter more than programs? That belonging matters more than budgets? That compassion matters more than appearance? Take a couple of minutes and discuss that.
I'm sure.
Let's wrap those up. So, you know what I kind of love about the answers to that kind of question? Nobody ever says, oh, well, they have the biggest sanctuary. Nobody says they have the largest budget. Nobody says they've mastered the latest church growth strategy. Instead, we say things like, they showed up, they listened, they fed people, they made room, they remembered my name, they sat with me, and my world fell apart. Deep down, I think we all already know what the kingdom looks like. Looks like people choosing people again and again. I don't think Jesus wanted us to leave this story asking, so how much should I give? I think he wanted us to leave asking, what kind of religion asked a widow to give her last 2 coins? Those are very different questions. One makes the widow the hero. The other asks whether the institution has forgotten why it exists. And folks, let me say this clearly. Churches exist for people. People do not exist for churches. Churches exist for people. People don't exist for churches. If we ever reverse that, we have wandered a long way away from the life and the teachings of Jesus. Because while everybody else was watching the offering, Jesus was watching the widow. May we kind of continue to become the kind of people, the kind of church, the kind of community that watches where Jesus watches, that notices who Jesus notices, that refuses to become so captivated by programs, projects, and property that we overlook people standing right there in front of us. Because in the end, I don't think Jesus was asking how much did she give. I think Jesus was asking, why did she have to? And I have a feeling that's the question that Jesus is still asking the church today. But
You find yourself paralyzed with grief and with fear, crying in the wilderness, thinking no one's there to hear. I'll be there to listen. I'll be there to hold your hand. I'll be there to share your burden and help you understand. You're not alone, not so alone. One thing I know for certain, a lot of us are hurt, and alone. Not so alone. When it gets too much to bear, just reach out, I'll be there. Not so alone. If you're looking for an answer, looking for a sign, if you're looking for an ear to bend, it might as well be mine. I might not have a solution, might not have much to say, but we'll sort it out together, somehow find a way to not be alone. Not so alone. As simple as it seems, we can't give up on our dreams. We're not alone. Not so alone. We're all worth celebrating. Nothing's gained from all this hating. Not so alone. We don't want to lose our way of life. We'll keep working for what's good and what's right. There's a story to be written, a song yet to be sung. There's steps to be taken, there's work to be done. There's folks who feel the way you do. If you just won't let them in, a world of kindred spirits, I hope that you begin to not feel alone. Not so alone. As simple as it seems, we can't give up on our dreams. We're not alone. Not so alone. When it gets too much to bear, just reach out, I'll be there. Not so alone.
So imagine the audacity of reading a scripture about scribes who pray long prayers and then praying a long prayer. I think I'm going to get away with it because, like I said, it doesn't have to be a prayer to you. It'll be a meditation, a moment just to grab some words you need. Let's bow our heads together. There is so much that competes for our attention. The loudest voices, the biggest success, the newest ideas, the brightest lights, the largest crowds. It is easy to notice what the world has taught us to notice. And it's just as easy to overlook the quiet courage of those who keep showing up, those who keep giving, those who keep carrying burdens few of us ever see, those who wonder if anyone notices how tired they have become. Yet again and again, Jesus seems drawn to the people that everyone else looks past. Not because they are projects to be fixed, but because they are people to be loved. May we learn to pay attention where Jesus paid attention. May our eyes be drawn less to appearances and more to people, less to success and more to suffering, less to buildings, budgets, and busy schedules, and more to belonging. May we remember that every institution, every church, every tradition, every ministry exists to help people become more fully alive. Whenever we forget that, may we have the humility to notice, the courage to change, and the grace to begin again. May our lives tell the truth about what we believe. May our church tell the truth about what it believes, not simply through the words we speak, but through the people we notice. The burdens we help carry, the dignity we help restore, the welcome we extend, the compassion we embody. May we never become so captivated by what is placed in the offering plate that we fail to notice the person holding the coins. May our hearts be formed more and more into the heart of the one who was always watching the widow. Amen. Receive this blessing. May you walk in harmony with one another and with creation, recognizing that we are one. And may you know love and happiness throughout your life. May you share that love and happiness with all of those you meet.
Okay, is this the sing-along or there's one more?
This is not the sing-along.
This is not the sing-along. I just want to make sure I have my key. Once I felt drawn to the highway. The young me was driven to run. Now the older me knows where my heart lies. And that's staying right here at home. You know I love the blue ocean waters, and I love the mountains serene. But let me be here in my homeland, the land that I call Guilford Green. We'll gather on some neighbor's front porch, in the tavern or down on the farm. We all get along, and there's always a song as we hold our children tight in our arms. And I love the blue ocean waters, and I love the mountains serene. So let me be here in my homeland, the land that I call Guilford Green. My time of wandering is over. I pulled out of the rat race. I raised my son here, and I know the time is near when his children will learn of this place. And they'll love the blue ocean waters, and they'll love the mountains serene. And they'll know that I love my homeland, the land that I call Guilford Green. Spending some mash in the blue ocean waters, and in the wind in the mountains serene. Please leave me here in my homeland, the land that I call Guilford Green. The land that I call Guilford Green.